This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
The midsummer heat wave is really making itself known here in Ohio. Can only imagine what it would be like to have to work at an unair-conditioned shop for 8 hours a day. Now, it'd be one thing if it was just hot, but it's also extremely humid and sunny, which means double the amount of uncomfortable working conditions. A couple weeks ago, it was pretty bad. I was showing up in tank tops and shorts, getting absolutely maimed by bugs too, which is a whole other nightmare scenario. It was even worse last year. I think I had a good 15 to 20 bug bites all over my body by the end of the summer. Those things are ruthless, man. I hate bugs. But our shop attracts them because we've got wood everywhere, metal, just sawdust, anything that can possibly attract creatures like that. Or a hotbed for it. I don't even have a fear of bugs. I just hate their mere existence. I don't care what they taught me in the Episcopal Church, whatever they call that, Sunday school class. They're all God's creatures. Nah, they can piss off for all I care. Not everything in this world is sacred and worth keeping around. Now I'm back in my air-conditioned apartment. It's like I'm walking into a freezer. And I set the thermostat to 70. That's not even considerably cool. But compared to outdoors, it's fall weather in here right now. But I got my water beverage sitting here on the table. Decent cup of coffee here. It's 6 o'clock at night. But it's the Five Starr Wrestling Report. The wrestling podcast no one knows but everybody needs. Welcome to the show, new and returning viewers. It's kind of odd looking at my notes for this week and realizing I'm actually going to get to cover a TBS Saturday Night syndicated program for a change. How long has that been? A good month? We've also got Midsouth television as well. Some good stuff to get into this week. And unlike Retro Raw, these shows didn't drive me up a wall. The WCW still by and large sucks at this point in 1990. But it's not like the WWF in 97 where the shows just make you question your fandom of the product. I mean, the syndicated programs are largely boring and lifeless, as most of them have been since the Turner regime takeover, where they basically watered down everything about the television product. Well, we've complained about that plenty over the last year and a half. I know it's easy enough to blame Hurd for a lot of those decisions, but I mean, we shouldn't forget, at the helm of everything we see with the current on-screen product right now, Ole Anderson's the one piecing together the bulk of the major storylines. And to say Ole was out of touch with knowing how to book fun and interesting professional wrestling feuds in 1990, God, that's an understatement, big dog. That guy was clueless beyond belief. God rest his soul. I never disliked Ole personally. Yeah, he was a dick. I think most people that worked with him would agree with that statement. Even the people who liked him. But God almighty, you watch these mid to late TBS programs from 1990, it's just littered with so much out-of-date material. Now let's get into it and you'll see what I mean, especially this week. And unlike last week's recap, I should be able to hypothetically blast through this one in about 5 minutes. Remember the good old days of Crockett TV when the weekly Saturday TBS shows were fun? Remember when they actually had segments worth talking about? I miss those days. The Saturday night 6:05 shows, actually I think they're technically 7:05 now, but they've devolved into NWA Pro levels of irrelevance. It is literally just a show. They don't even bother to really plug the local live events like they used to. They mention them in passing, but the promos don't do anything to promote them. You know, you figure, I mean, around this time, who was buying fucking tickets for the live events anyway? What's there to even promote? And looking ahead here, now that we're a week removed from the Great American Bash, I guess the next big themed pay-per-view would be Halloween Havoc in October, which is another landmark event for the WCW series. Not for good reason either. It'll be the last appearance we see of Bobby Eaton, Stan Lane, and Jim Cornette as the Midnight Express. Hard to imagine that's coming up so soon. But then again, you think about it. We have been covering the last 5 years of the NWA. All great things must come to an end eventually, right? As they all do. So like I said, this is the post-Great American Bash syndicated program, which means we basically got an hour's worth of unexceptional content. You can immediately tell it was taped prior to the pay-per-view too, because the opening match had Lex Luger coming out to work a squash match, and his hair was about 3 inches longer than what we saw at the pay-per-view. So either this was taped before that, or Luger somehow conspicuously grew his hair back in 7 days. And I know Luger had good genetics, but I'm betting on the former here. Anyway, he wrestled some nondescript job guy named Brian Carr. The announcers mentioned absolutely nothing regarding Luger's match with Mean Mark. They did, however, talk about him beating Sid at the June Clash in 20 seconds. Another indication this was taped before the Bash. So he beat up Carr for a few minutes, and then after hitting a middle rope superplex, he looked at the fans to give them the sign that he was about to set up the torture rack, and then he proceeded to turn around and pin the guy flat. Well, that was a dick move for a babyface. I'm going to hint to the audience by teasing my finisher, and then not give it to them. The only move that people ever gave a shit about with Lex Luger. Let's not give them that. Anyway, that was a total waste of 3 minutes. Then they followed that with a Tommy Rich inset promo where he plugged his match later on with Stan Hansen. Yeah, stop me if you've heard this talking point before. WCW in the year 1990 going back to the well with feuds and programs that were hot about 20 years prior, between stars who were hot about 20 years prior, and then subsequently thinking that would translate to television in the present tense. Wonder who could have come up with a booking idea for this week's TV main event, where Tommy Rich is talking about history between him and Stan that dates back to them battling over the Georgia Tag Team titles in the late 70s. So we talked about that for a minute, and then he basically implied that Stan might beat his ass from pillar to post, but he's going to take that beating like a man and get all the rowdy fans to support him with chants of "Go Wildfire, go." And I will spoil it now. Fans do not get behind Wildfire Tommy Rich with those chants later on. Shocking. I know. We did get some quick quote-unquote highlights of the Bash pay-per-view. And I use that term loosely considering one of those clips they aired was footage of El Gigante coming out for that god-awful six-man tag. Of all things for them to try to spotlight from that pay-per-view, El Gigante. That was the one we needed to be reminded of. All the while that pesky match of the year candidate between the Midnight Express and the Southern Boys for the U.S. tag straps. No mention of that. Funny how that works. I do have to admit, this got a pop out of me. The post-celebratory champagne shower in the locker room with Sting and the rest of the babyfaces, with Gordon Soley, the most milquetoast straight shooter babyface announcer of all time. He gets absolutely doused with champagne during this segment. He's just calmly interviewing the Stinger and no selling it. That was fucking awesome. I laughed at that. They very easily could have used like a JR or a Bob Caudle for that interview spot. No, they had Gordon Soley be the one to conduct it. It had to be a rib. He knew he was going to get drenched in that tuxedo, and he took it like a champ. Mad respect. So then we had the fabulous fake Birds taking on the Southern Boys. Thankfully, the Birds decided to ditch the Adrian Street apparel for this one. They still had guy liner on, but it was still highly less offensive than whatever the hell that was they wore at the pay-per-view the other week. They billed this as a return match from when the Southern Boys beat the Birds at the Clash in June, with the idea being that win that Tracy and Steve got over the Birds, that was a complete fluke, and it will never happen again. And guess what? By the end of this match, they pretty much got over that the win was a fluke, and it would never happen again. Don't you love it when the heels are proven right? I even remember saying, too, I have vague memories of the Freebirds Southern Boys feud being a very one-sided program, where they gave the babyfaces that one win at the Clash, and then the company proceeded to beat them like a government mule over and over again after the fact. I mean, the match was just okay. But it was also one of those matches where they gave Tracy and Steve so much offense throughout, you almost instinctually knew that the Birds were going to win. There was a brief 2-minute window of heat where they worked over Steve. A lot of that, though, bled through the commercial break. And when they came back with Tracy making the babyface hot tag, there was a four-way spot where Hayes dumped Steve out to the floor. And while the ref was directing Steve back to his corner, they do a roll-through spot where Tracy has Garvin pinned. But then Hayes came in and clotheslined Tracy so Garvin could get on top and get the pin on him. There was a good bit of clunkiness during the early stages when the Southern Boys were in control. At one point, they tried doing shoot-off spots with Garvin and Hayes, and they were essentially walking to the opposite ends of the ring. I don't know if they got blown up or just flat out had no idea what they were feeding for, but it was very noticeable. My only other conclusion would be, are the Freebirds intentionally sabotaging this match, or are they actually tired? The match, by the way, went less than 10 minutes. And I know Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin didn't have the best cardio in the world, but if they got blown up in an 8-minute TV match, something wasn't right there. It's whatever. For my money, after the Southern Boys lost to the Midnights of the Bash, you could pretty much write those guys off. They were just another set of bodies in the tag division with no direction and no purpose. Which is sad, because I like Tracy and Steve as a tag team. The problem is the company never got behind them, because Jim Herd hated anybody who wasn't a megastar, and Ole straight up didn't give a shit. So there was no hope. Then we had a Sid Vicious Arn Anderson pre-tape. They were also talking about flukes and one-time only events. That being Luger's win over Sid at the Clash a month ago. And then they started talking about turmoil in the Horsemen. People apparently have been starting rumors that there's dissension amongst the crew. To which I asked, who? Who is mentioning anything about turmoil or breaking up in the Horsemen? When has that story ever been started or implied on TV? I love when they just arbitrarily infer storylines that have never been previously established. I mean, Arn assured us that everything was fine. Talked about the laundry list of guys who have met the wrath of the Horsemen throughout the years. He also said we're in the end times. And while I know Arn was talking about a completely separate topic here, when he stood there with a straight face and told us that we are currently in the end times, I said, Arn is blatantly telling us how truly terrible the product is right now. We are indeed in the end times of WCW. Because boy howdy is this show fucking rotten. Still a great promo for the record. The delivery was outstanding. But there was some deep thought being put into this promo here. Double A was delivering a very secret message. People watching at home, this show sucks. Speaking of arbitrary and bizarre out-of-the-blue storylines, here's another example of those. They're apparently booking a gauntlet series for the Stinger. He has to wrestle 3 consecutive matches on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday over the next week, against 3 random names that'll be drawn out of a hat. If he wins all 3 matches, he wins $15,000. But if he loses any of those 3 matches, the $15,000 will be split amongst his opponents. Even if those 3 opponents happen to be a combination of babyfaces and heels. And it's like, I mean, I really hate to be that guy, but when they mention this, I'm sitting there like, who the fuck could possibly care? No, really, think about it. Why would anybody care to see the Stinger win 15 grand for winning a completely random gauntlet series? Much less having him split the funds for his opponents should he lose? Where did this all come from? It's not even like we're talking about a storyline where the Stinger had won $15,000 at some point, but, then a group of heels stole the money and are holding it hostage. In that case, there'd at least be a reason to have Sting win the 15 grand back. It was his money in the first place. Have him run through all the members of the Horsemen to win it back. That would be logical. It would be silly. But at least there would be a motive to want to see the babyface win his fucking money back. This is just, for no reason at all, let's see if Sting can win money by wrestling a gauntlet. A gauntlet, by the way, that he has no rhyme or reason to be a part of other than he wants to be. Is he defending the title? Is that also part of the stipulation? I don't think they mention anything about that. Again, we talk about why WCW was such a failing promotion by this point. It's reasons like this when you look back and realize these people had zero original booking ideas. It's not even like they were doing this as a way to promote a live event or a big upcoming show. They're literally doing this to try to pop a TV rating. Did it work in the long haul? All signs point to no. Even if you were an avid hardcore watcher of the product during this time, you probably don't remember this Gauntlet series. I sure as fuck didn't. Can you imagine the idea that hard-working blue-collar employees of America couldn't give two shits about seeing professional wrestlers become $15,000 richer? Yeah, hard to believe that wouldn't get over with the common man. Absolutely clueless. On the topic of clueless and things not getting over, you know what else didn't get over? Norman the Lunatic becoming a truck driver and Tim Horner wrestling under a mask known as the Star Blazer. I know. Incredibly shocking news to hear in 2026. Somebody actually left a comment on the video, and this absolutely killed me, because it's so fucking true. Tim Horner, even less charismatic under a mask. Hard to believe. Well, truth hurts sometimes. And he wasn't wrong, by the way. His opponent, Kola Khan, had more charisma than Horner did. He basically did a Tijo Khan knockoff gimmick and tried to pull off the same hairdo. It did not work. Crowd was radio silent during this segment. Mice pissing in the rafters level of quiet. They did not care. Nor did I. I got up to take a piss during this segment, and when I came back, not only was the match still going on, but Horner was working over Khan's arm in a hold. Then I got up to leave again and then come back a minute later, only to see Horner yet again working over the same arm in the same boring hold. And approximately 3 minutes after that, what I determined is the world's most dreary and drawn-out squash match, Horner gave Khan a sloppy-looking bulldog from the top rope and pinned him. Same move I believe that Rick Steiner used to break Buff Bagwell's neck in WCW. Fun fact. So all things being said, I was not a fan of this match. I was, however, a fan of Stan Hansen's super old-school heel promo. The most 1970s territorial-style heel promo you could possibly imagine. Stan calling out Tommy Rich's family and fans, saying none of them are going to be able to save Rich from the beating he's going to get later on. He said, "The past is in the past, and it's time to live in the present." Agreed. Might want to pass that message on to Ole. He said he's bringing the bell with him tonight, and he's going to show that the Stan Hansen of today is more ruthless and more hard-hitting than ever before. And he somehow got through this entire promo without ever directly spitting out his chewing tobacco, which I was very much impressed by. I did make a side note about that comment too. The past is in the past. Words of wisdom from Stan Hansen of all people. Almost poetic in a way. And yeah, I'm not making that up. In the year 1990, we get Tommy Wildfire Rich versus Stan Hansen. But here's the amazing thing. When you go back and look at their ages at this time, Stan was 41 years old, and Tommy Rich was 34. Can you believe that? I swear, if I didn't know any better, I'd have presumed Stan was in his mid-50s and Tommy would have been like in his early 40s. Not only were these guys seasoned veterans by this point, they had both been in the business for about 18 years. And they still had not hit their mid-40s yet. And again, we talk about old school territorial style booking. This is a total Georgia Territory style match. You had the big, mean, grizzled Southern heel versus the scrappy, good-looking blonde underdog babyface. Now, I will say, it did not have the crowd environment of, say, an Omni in Atlanta. But then again, you look at where they were taping the show this week. It was the Cobb County Civic Center in Marietta. So they were still in the heart of Georgia Territory, kind of bringing the show back to its former roots. Back when they actually drew in Marietta before everything went to shit. I understand for a lot of people, this style of match probably wouldn't get over very well in today's market. To be blunt, it didn't really get over with the market here in 1990. And this was back when fans weren't as smartened up as they are now. They did a very basic babyface heel match where Tommy got in his hope spots and kept trying to knock the bigger guy off his feet. Stan kept the pressure applied and used his power game to keep Tommy isolated throughout. I wouldn't say the work was clean or smooth. Stan looked like he was fighting on fumes by the end of it there. The thought hit me, though, as I was watching this go down. How many matches have we seen Stan Hansen have since he showed up? It's not a lot. I would honestly bet it's less than 5. I recall him doing a couple TV squashes, but that's about it. So he really hasn't been that active in the ring, outside whatever they had him doing at the local house shows or live events. And it's not to say that he looked bad here. At the same time, I wouldn't say he did anything to blow me away. Of course, they went with the classic heat finish of having Stan dump Tommy over the top rope for the automatic DQ, which led to the angle afterward where he beat up Tommy Rich with a cowbell and also laid out Pee Wee Anderson for good measure. And that set up a deal after the break where Nick Patrick came out and levied a 30-day suspension and a $5,000 fine on Stan for laying his hands on a WCW official. I'm not exactly sure how or why Nick Patrick would have the authority to levy this fine on Stan when he was not an executive for the company, but we'll look past all that. I did enjoy when Stan tried to confront Nick about it, and Nick goes, "If you put your hands on me, I'll see it fit that your fine is doubled and that you're out of wrestling for a full year." And he said it with such vigor and such confidence. I actually believed him. Even though the whole thing is beyond preposterous. A lot of people forget Nick's backstory. If I've mentioned it before, I apologize, but I think it's worth noting. Nick was actually a wrestler in the early to mid-'80s. He was Jody Hamilton's son, the original assassin. Yeah, Nick wrestled for Ron Fuller in the Gulf Coast for a little bit, and I think he might have done some enhancement work for Watts too. It would have had to be around the same time we're currently at with the Midsouth timeline, so if we do end up seeing him, I'll be proven right in that theory. But of course, his career came to a pretty tragic end when he got hurt and almost immediately retired from in-ring competition. And it's sad because he was a really good worker. I remember he had a lot of classic moments during the height of the Monday Night Wars as a biased heel referee in WCW. Didn't he become like a paid partial referee for the NWO? It was like the only time in history where I ever signed off on the biased heel official in wrestling. It was when Nick Patrick was doing the gimmick, because he pulled it off so well. And he was good here too. Standing up to Stan and laying down the law. I wish more referees in wrestling were like Nick Patrick today. Referees that weren't afraid of their own shadow. And that actually stand up to the heels and try to enforce some honest-to-God boundaries. Now they got female referees in the business today. God almighty. Business sucks. Can you imagine a fucking female referee standing up to Stan Hansen? Get out of here with that shit. No, in retrospect, did the show do anything to build to the next big pay-per-view or help to sell tickets for the live events? No. It was a television program headlined by Tommy Rich versus Stan Hansen in a feud that they've been waiting to pay off allegedly for well over 15 years. I promise you, nobody's forking over money to see Tommy get his revenge on Stan for getting beaten up with a cowbell. The show is a complete write-off this week. And I know we're still a ways out from Starrcade in December, but the other thing to remember too is that they're going to start airing vignettes and talking about the Black Scorpion gimmick pretty soon, which is a whole other can of worms that we're going to have to dive into in the fall. Technically, I don't think the debut of the gimmick happens until the Fall Brawl Clash in September. But if I remember right, I think they start airing tapes a few weeks beforehand, like hyping the debut. This is the direction the company's headed. We talked about the fallout to Sting becoming the World Heavyweight Champion and everything it led to as a result. You know, the fact that Sting didn't make a single appearance on the show should tell you something. Complete afterthought. Just 7 days after becoming the World Heavyweight Champion. Again, I know it was taped, but you think they would have thought a little further in advance about that? And you know, whatever you think about his title reign, good, bad, or indifferent, you can't fully blame the Stinger for how everything went down. I mean, look at how they were booking him during his title reign. On top of the Black Scorpion shit that was horrible from day one, he had that awful pay-per-view match with Sid in October with that infamously bad finish with Barry Windham showing up as a fake Sting. I mean, how in the hell is anybody supposed to have a successful title reign dealing with terrible booking like that? Ric Flair couldn't pull that off. It's bad, dude. Really bad. And as I keep saying, from now until the end of the year, it's going to get a whole hell of a lot worse. All right. So Midsouth Wrestling this week. I'm just going to dive in with both feet and talk about this right from the jump. Midsouth opened with one of the goddamn funniest things I've ever seen. I have no other way to describe this other than it was a combination of the most baffling and most hysterically awkward interview I think I've ever seen Jim Ross conduct. And you know how sometimes I'll play audio samples instead of trying to explain it in real time? Just because sometimes the audio clip is more effective than actually trying to explain what happened. In this particular scenario, I think you actually have to watch the clip in order to understand how hilarious everything was. This is Jim Ross interviewing country music star Jerry Reed. Now, throughout this clip, I want you to pay special attention to Jim's facial expression. Tell me the word that comes to mind when you're trying to explain what is going through his mind here.
Here to talk with country music star Jerry Reed. What a fan of Mid-South Wrestling is that tremendous entertainer. I asked Jerry several questions. Here is some of that interview.
I watch it at home. You know, wrestling to me is one of the most entertaining things on earth. You know, you hear a lot of pros and cons about wrestling. There's wrestling fans that fight you over wrestling. I know, I grew up, my family was wrestling fans. I'd go down to City Auditorium, up in Marietta, Municipal Auditorium in Atlanta, and we'd watch wrestling. I mean, I've seen things in wrestling rings that make my heart stop. Just stop. So it really is, it's enjoyable to me. It's a fun sport, it's fun to watch. And you know, the wrestling fans they're in those matches like they're in the ring themselves. And that's what's really so good about it. You know, it's the wrestlers, you relate to them, they communicate with them, you know, and it's macho, and it's good. Macho's good. I like it.
Jim, you know, Jerry Reed was certainly a
What in the actual fuck did I just watch? Was that an interview or a fucking ASMR meditation skit? And what in the hell was that reaction from JR? Other than absolute bewilderment. I'm telling you this right now. I've seen a lot of strange segments in my time in watching wrestling. This Jerry Reed interview on Midsouth television from 1985, it is up there in terms of all-time awkward television moments. I can't believe they actually aired it. They watched that back and said, let's put that on television for people to see. Well, it was quite the spectacle. I can all but confirm that might have been the most uncomfortable I've ever seen Jim Ross on camera during my lifetime. And he's been involved in some pretty weird shit. Now, bearing in mind, when I recorded that sample there, that was probably my 6th time watching the video back. I could not make it through with a straight face. I went back and rewatched the whole thing like 5 times prior to that. It got funnier every time I saw it again. I tried to contain myself, but I couldn't do it. Every time they cut to Jim, I just burst out laughing. I think it's the eyebrow raise. That and his eyes getting extraordinarily huge. Everything about it was epic train wreck television. By far the highlight of my week was listening to Jerry Reed ramble and mumble about going to see the wrestling shows. And poor JR stared at him blankly and looked absolutely confused beyond belief. Like, what in the fuck is happening right now? Are we actually going to air this? Indeed they did. And what a payoff. Classic wrestling segment if there ever was one. Keep in mind too, there's a Fantastics video package we're going to talk about at the end of this recap. That was even stranger. But this was just hysterically bad. So less than 5 minutes into the show and I'm already rolling on the floor in tears. It did not help my composure when they proceeded to cut to the ring for Boyd Pierce to do ring intros, and his microphone started peaking. And he just stopped, rolled his eyes, and continued on. This is where I determined it's going to be one of those weeks, isn't it? Little did I know. So the match here is Mike Graham versus Tom Pritchard. Our first look at Mike in the Mid-South area. He got absolutely no reaction from the fans here, which is kind of the story of Mike's entire in-ring career, period. Despite being the son of one of the most successful wrestling promoters of all time, I don't really know if I want to go into a huge diatribe about Mike. There has been a lot said about him from more qualified experts in the business over time. You know, you often think the conversation comes up a lot on who are the most overpushed, or undeserving second or third generation talents, or guys that were the promoter's sons and had nowhere near the same drawing ability or star power. Yeah, you think like names like Greg Gagne come to mind, Eric Watts, hate to say it, but Jeff Jarrett, at least in terms of modern workers today. And he's been in the news quite a bit. They put out that Dark Side of the Ring series on TNA, and he's at the forefront of it. But you know, people talk about Mike Graham. It's never usually in the context of him as a worker. so much so as it is anything he ever did as a producer or agent in wrestling. I've seen a decent bit of Mike Graham footage throughout the years. Most of it being Florida tapes that are out there from like 82 to 85, I think. Like right before he took over in the office after Eddie died. There's some stuff out there with him teaming with Steve Kern in Memphis. And I always kind of chalk the conversation up to this. It's astonishing to think that a guy who was trained by his father Eddie, Boris Malenko, and fucking Hiro Matsuda, yet he still wound up being flatter than a plate full of piss. And I don't want to speak ill of the dead. I know Mike's been gone for a while now. I know there have been stories floating out there that he felt responsible for his dad and his son's death. They both died exactly in the same manner. Self-inflicted gunshot to the head, which is also how Mike took his own life. There's a radio interview out there with Kevin Sullivan where he talked about one of the final conversations he had with Mike right before he died. Like, he'd already been threatening suicide for a while, and he was pretty mentally unstable to begin with. Again, I don't want to try and compare his personal life with his in-ring career. They're mutually exclusive conversations. But, you know, two things can't be true at once. Yeah, he had a lot of issues, and it's sad with how everything went down. But you can also be objective and say that he was never anything special as an in-ring talent. And you know, this match was very much a reflection of that story in a lot of cases. He and Dr. Tom had a competent and technically sound professional wrestling match. There was nothing remotely special or unique about it. It's not like Mike was physically imposing either. He was maybe 5'8" at most. I mean, he was shorter than Dr. Tom here, and I know for a fact that Tom wasn't 6 feet himself. He might have been 180 pounds in the ballpark. So in addition to him not having a whole lot of personality or charisma, he also didn't have any standout physical qualities. He was a decent athlete, but that was about it. Again, the work was fine, but nothing special. He ended up catching Tom in the figure four after a couple little clunky back and forth spots at the end. I won't belabor it. Far as I know, I don't think Mike worked too many dates in the Mid-South area. This is obviously post-Eddie Graham death as well. I think Eddie took his own life in January of '85. So even by this point, Mike had been primarily stationed in Florida running the day-to-day operations of the territory. It's not like he had time to be working a full-time schedule with Watts. Honestly, this might have been a one-off appearance. Guess we'll find out. And so then we had rather interesting story development here in Mid-South. You might recall, some odd months ago, when Eddie Gilbert and the Nightmare came to the Mid-South area, there was a point where I talked about how I remember them coming in together with Eddie managing the Nightmare, but then at some point they sort of went their separate ways and split apart. And then Eddie ended up turning heel while Moondog sort of vanished and went away by the end of the year. Well, come to find out, now I remember why I have little memory of how they ended up breaking up as a unit. It's because Oliver Humperdink, of all people, showed up and randomly declared himself the new manager for the Nightmare, aka the champion. Why do I have no memory of Humperdink managing the Nightmare in Mid-South? Come to think of it, I don't remember Oliver Humperdink in Midsouth at all. When did he go to the WWF? That was 86, right? When he managed Bam Bam? Where was he at before Midsouth then? It had to have been Mid-Atlantic, right? Or maybe Florida. This is a fucking mind warp right now. I cannot figure out why I have no recollection of ever seeing Humperdink manage anybody in the Mid-South area. This had to have been like a 2 or 3 month run and then he was gone, right? When did Eddie turn heel? That was the fall of 85, I think. Because the Hot Stuff International stable isn't that far removed from this point. I am totally blanking on where in the hell Humperdink's alliance with the Nightmare fits in all this. This is a weird memory slip. But sure as shit, the Nightmare kicked Eddie to the curb. He said that Humperdink is taking over as his new manager. And Eddie pretty much walked off and told them both to kick rocks. Which is giving me absolutely no reason to think he's turning heel anytime in the next month. But crazier things have happened, so we'll see. Crazier than Sir Oliver Humperdink making a random cameo in Midsouth in the summer of 85. By the way, this came right the fuck out of nowhere, didn't it? They never teased the idea that there was dissension between Moondog and Eddie. But all of a sudden this week, he's like, sorry, Eddie. I'm switching managers. Sucks to suck. Very strange. And so then we got the Nightmare / the Champion versus Frank Lane. Moondog gave Frankie precisely one offensive spot in this match. A Thez press that Frankie completely fucked up. And so he said, nope, fuck this. And Moondog took over and proceeded to beat Frank's ass for several minutes before putting him away with a pile driver. Let that be a lesson to all the ring veterans. Never let a green job guy try to get offense on you. Never ends well. We then had Ted DiBiase and Dr. Death versus Brickhouse Brown and Mark Reagan. I think it was the match they had last week. Brickhouse and Reagan had an absolutely abhorrent TV squash with a couple enhancement guys that completely fell apart. Well, I got good news. Their match this week with DiBiase and Williams, it was 1,000 times better. The bad news is Brickhouse and Reagan still suck, and the people still don't give two shits about them as a team. There was one spot early on with Brickhouse and Williams where Brickhouse attempted a crossbody attack, but he overshot Williams and ended up yeeting himself on the top rope, which I admittedly laughed at. Aside from that, the rest of it was fairly one-sided. The heels pretty much dominated the entire thing. Reagan tried to make a hot tag to Brickhouse, but DiBiase immediately shit-canned him and leveled Brickhouse with a lariat. And then he tagged in Williams for the Oklahoma Stampede and the pinfall. So yeah, they pretty much made Brickhouse and Reagan look like total chumps here. They sold and sold and sold, got cut off during the attempted comeback spot, and then got pinned less than a minute later. Thanks for coming, boys. Pleasure knowing you. And so then we had the Battle of the Texas Tough Guys. according to Boyd. It's Oil Trough native Dutch Mantell versus Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch, marching out to the ring to the tune of the classic Marine Hymn March. And before anything can get underway, out comes Ted DiBiase to cut a promo on Dickie. And I'm going to be the first to admit here, I had no earthly idea what the hell these two were talking about during their verbal back and forth. All I got out of it was Ted calling out Dickie for being a phony football player, which I believe is an actual true story that's been well documented for years, that Murdoch never actually played football for West Texas State University. In fact, he never attended West Texas State. But he had convinced so many people that he actually went to high school there, people actually bought it. Which is the best kayfabe story I think I've ever heard. And so then Dickie fired back and told DiBiase to send off his ring rat Dutch. And they'll get it on right here and right now. And after calling Dutch Mantell a ring rat, he had no problem with this. Not only did he shrug his shoulders and immediately leave, he didn't even stick around to defend himself. Dick Murdoch just blew him off like a complete dork. Dutch had no problem with it. He's like, all right, dude, I'm out of here. Current TV champion, by the way, Dirty Dutch Mantell. Just want to throw that out there for the record. And so then we had an impromptu brawl between Murdoch and DiBiase. It should also be noted before I explain what happened next, there is obviously history between DiBiase and Murdoch. And they were a big part of the top feud / programs throughout 1985. Or at least one of the top feuds. But it should be noted that up until this week, we had not actually seen these two come face to face. They just had DiBiase come out to confront Murdoch, seemingly from out of the blue. So that was already kind of befuddling in and of itself. But then we get involvement from the Nightmare, as he tries to come out and pile drive Murdoch once Dirty Dutch and DiBiase try to handicap him. Oh yeah, Dirty Dutch ran back in, by the way. A completely ran a run-in from the North American champion, which did not lead anywhere. Murdoch ended up punking him out and making him look like a dork. And then we eventually get the returning Hacksaw Butch Reed running out to send the heels packing. It was a very odd involvement from a cast of guys who we have not seen interact in any previous angle or segment on TV. I'm looking at the names here. DiBiase, The Nightmare, Dirty Dutch, Captain Redneck, and Hacksaw Reed. I saw this and I'm like, when in the hell was it ever established that any of these guys had beef with one another? It was a fun brawl, sure. But story-wise, it was very confusing. Especially when the whole premeditation for DiBiase coming out was, hey everybody, this Dick Murdoch guy's a big fat phony. He never played football. He's a liar. A charlatan. And Murdoch never denied any of it. That was the funny part. He just called DiBiase a jabroni and threatened to beat his ass. And that was enough for the people to rally behind him. Now, for the record, I know this will be explained later on, especially the dynamic between Murdoch and DiBiase, because, well, it's about to get a hell of a lot more interesting over the next couple months between those two. It goes in a way that you would not expect. but the payoff is great. But this week, it was very odd. Staying on the topic of Reed very briefly, his return match this week was with Mark Hawk, the classic example of a giant baked potato with arms and legs. This Mark Hawk fella. It's funny because the guy was a good 50 pounds heavier than Reed, easily. Reed still had no issue throwing the guy around and making him look like a total scrub. Tossed him around, decked him with some classic Butch Reed soup bones. Then he won with a flying shoulder block in about 2 minutes. As Jim noted here, it wasn't pretty looking, but it was effective. And that's all that matters. Looking ahead too, we're going to have to keep tabs on Reed over the next several months because there's some interesting development with him during, I think, what wound up being his final Mid-South run before he left for the WWF next year. I'm trying to think of the timeline again. It's been so long since I've gone back and rewatched the whole archive series. I vaguely remember him getting involved with Dick Slater toward the end of the year, right as soon as Slater came into the territory. And it wasn't too long before Slater ended up winning the North American title. And I think if I'm correct on this, he ended up beating Butch Reed for it. Because it was like one of the last things Butch did before he left. Which means that sometime between now and the end of '85, Reed ends up with the North American title again. So it might have been him who ended up beating the Nightmare for it. We'll see. I just remember the run being relatively short. Not the title reign, I'm talking about Reed's return to Mid-South here. It's like he was there and then he was gone again within months. Then he showed up in the WWF with Slick and dyed his hair blonde. I know I keep reverting back to this term, but it really is true when you think about it. Wrestling from like 1985 up until the Monday Night War period when the product became hot again, there was a lot of weird, oddball shit that happened during that 10-year gap. Guys coming and going in various regions and territories, weird storylines and angles that I completely forgot about or have very little memory of. And I'm not just talking Mid-South. It's a similar thing with what we've been covering with the post-Crockett period of the NWA timeline. For like 1989 onward, a lot of bizarre, hokey stuff that happened. So they recapped the Duggan footage from his match with Kareem Muhammad the other week. That was a match where if Duggan beat Muhammad, he would get Akbar in the ring. And, well, as we reviewed last week, we got Akbar in the ring, delivering the single worst kicks I've ever seen to Duggan's sternum. I can't even call them worked kicks. When you work somebody, you have to give off the illusion that you're actually doing something that looks real. Ain't nothing real about those Akbar kicks. But anyway, that all led to this classic Joel Watts line after they recapped the footage, where he goes, "Judging from that tape we saw, it looks like Akbar was scheming that whole attack from the beginning." You think, Joel? Boy, nothing gets by you, dude. Expert take. And that was all a setup of sorts for the tag match we got next. It's Mike Nichols and Wendell Coley taking on the newly debuting Bounty Hunters. Jerry and David Novak. They were a regularly used heel team in Memphis in, I want to say 1980? It wasn't the late 70s, was it? It was a little before I started getting into the Memphis tape library on YouTube. I had heard plenty of mentions about the Bounty Hunters, but I don't think I'd actually seen any footage of them wrestling. Kind of your standard burly big dude heels. They were identical twins, so that was the main catch with their gimmick. They've also been mentioned in a lot of Jim Cornette's trivia history games that he does with Brian Last on his podcast. But they were brought in here as hired hands of Akbar. They're going to be a big part of next week's TV show when they team up to face Hacksaw Duggan and Cowboy Watts, which is going to be interesting, to say the least. This here was just a quick get-over squash. Akbar was out there to watch him and then promptly left after the Bounty Hunters won. We will see how everything goes down next week when they're paired up against Hacksaw Duggan and Bill Watts. I would venture a guess that it's going to be one of those knuckle-down, drag-out slobber knockers. I can tell you right now, if you're expecting a Midnight Express Fantastics level classic, might want to rethink your standards. You have noticed too, Midsouth has kind of reverted back to form in a lot of ways with the big guys. Remember in 1984 when Bill Dundee came down to book, Bill had kind of gone away from using the traditional big guys in the main event picture, and here we are in the fall of '85. It's right back to old form, man. Everybody in the main event picture is 250 pounds plus. Not saying it's a good or bad thing, it's just an observation. We had Jake the Snake and Barbarian getting a win over the Red Raider and Larry Clark. I can sum it up with the following bullet point. The Barbarian did about 800 power moves in a row, and then he tagged in Jake, who hit a DDT on Clark for the pinfall, and the DDT got a bigger pop than any other move we saw in the match. Keep in mind that Jake and the Barbarian are still heels, by the way. We have now reached the point in Jake's Mid-South run where, even as a heel, the fans can't help but like the guy. I mean, that's typically what happens when you're supposed to be a hated villain, but you're also way too damn good at your job. It's impossible to be booed. As we found out over time with many bad guys. And that left us with a video package featuring the Fantastics that absolutely would not fly if they tried to produce it for television today. I'll explain. It was a pre-taped video with Bobby and Tommy being wacky, horny baby faces while they played ZZ Top's Tush. Now, for those of you who aren't quite up to speed here, Tush used to be a politically incorrect way to refer to a person's ass, primarily a female ass. So you can only imagine what a videotape of Bobby and Tommy stalking local girls while the cameraman is blatantly filming their asses looks like. As I noted, totally would not fly in today's culture. And believe it or not, that part was even less insane than them having Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton on an interstate, topless by the way, trying to flag down vehicles so they could get a ride to town. And mind you, this was not a private shoot. They shot this on a busy interstate with thousands of cars passing by every minute. Bobby and Tommy are just standing on the side of the road while cars are flying by like 60 miles an hour. No problem. Can you imagine what people were probably thinking during this time? If you happen to be in one of those cars driving by. Like, what the fuck is going on here? I know it was the 80s. I don't think people would bat an eyelash if people did that today. I've seen people do some weird shit on the side of the road before. But they actually taped all this. They had a half-naked Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers hitchhike on a public interstate, travel downtown to look at girls' butts, while the cameraman filmed them. And then the payoff was them getting into a sports car with a couple gals, presumably to fuck. Wrestling is very silly sometimes. I have no other way to describe it. It was a video package that any major network would look at today and immediately cancel a program if it aired. In 1985, no issues. Go right ahead and film those ladies' buttocks. Why not? It's all in good fun. It was amazing. And such an apropos way to cap off this absolutely bizarre episode of Midsouth television. I don't think I'll forget this show for as long as I live. It was a weird show. Between that Fantastics video package, that awkward as fuck interview with JR and Jerry Reed, to a lesser degree seeing Mike Graham show up on Midsouth TV just months after his dad died, whatever in the hell that brawl segment was with Murdoch, DiBiase, Reed, and the rest of the peanut gallery. There were a lot of things going on this week that left me scratching my head. Humperdink showing up and randomly becoming the Nightmare's new manager. You know, if I didn't know any better, I'd have figured Russo was booking the show this week. But then I thought about it again and I'm like, nah, can't be a Russo show. There wasn't enough screaming and swearing going on. We didn't have the proverbial scantily clad women in a shark cage. We did get to see scantily clad women in that Fantastics tape. But they still at least had their clothes on. Plus they weren't screaming and calling each other skanks and whores. That's another Russo classic. The show wasn't boring. And I'll accept that. A show can be wacky as fuck. But as long as I'm not bored, I'll take it. We'll see how wacky next week's program is. That is the plan. I don't know how things are going to go this weekend, but I do plan on still doing an upcoming Monday and Friday podcast next week. We'll see how I fit things in over the weekend, though. I should have some time. I'm actually not teaching over the weekend for a change, so my morning will not be completely shot. But stay tuned for all that. Thanks everybody for watching, and talk to y'all soon. Take care and peace out.